My name is Jim Schmidtlein. I am from the Verizon product development team. I'm going to start some conversations today around security in the cloud. We heard a little bit about that this morning, and I think we're going to be talking about security in the cloud really for the days, weeks, months, and years to come. So just to, lay a little bit of the groundwork for you as we get started, just so you understand why I'm even here and talking to you. Some things that you know and some things that you don't know. I think most of you are familiar with Verizon as a leading communications provider, both wireless and wired, a global network provider, and things of that nature. Generally speaking, we are lesser known for some of the more detailed work we do around managed hosting, managed business outcome solutions, and managed security. We're actually a leading provider of managed IT services and global security services with a really interesting heritage that includes managing global identities for countries and things of that nature. So we have a really good heritage across managed networks, across managed IT solutions, cloud services, for which we've been in the market for a little over a year, and of course on the network security side. And that's why we're here today, starting the conversations with you around cloud security and what we can do, what we should be thinking about as we move forward into the next weeks, months, and years, kind of working through the cloud services model. So from a delivery model perspective, everyone is aware that things have changed drastically for the better, right? The cloud is here. We can't get away from the marketing terms. We can't get away from the technology, just like virtualization from a few years ago, right? So we want to try to start framing it up a little bit so that it's consumable, so that we can understand it and make it. And the first step down that path is I just wanted to help define some of the delivery models that are out in the world today. Existing IT services, the traditional on-premise models for delivering services that you're accustomed to, contrary to popular belief, they're not going away, right? We all know that you're looking at evaluating applications, seeing what makes sense to move into the cloud, but you're also seeing what makes sense to keep on-premise inside of your facilities, inside of your data centers, inside of your hosting providers' facilities. So we're looking at the evolution of a fairly complex environment in a lot of ways. We're looking at how you can juggle what you have in your environment today, how you can make it make sense because you're under a lot of pressure to make it make sense financially, how you leverage internal private clouds to improve flexibility, to improve manageability, to improve the things that you do every day, and to improve your service delivery to your end customers, whether they're internal or external. And then, of course, how we actually start accessing the public cloud and how we do it safely. And all three of these models are great. From a Verizon perspective, we've been preaching the value of the hybrid cloud since we launched last year because we believe that there are always going to be components that you retain control of. So along those lines, I think the first statement that we want to make around security and cloud-based services is that your security model doesn't change because you're starting to leverage cloud-based services. Whether you have internal private clouds, you're leveraging the emerging value of what we heard earlier today around vCloud Data Center and the new technologies that are out there today. Your security model doesn't change. Your governance models don't change. Your requirements for data isolation and privacy don't change. And it's important that we frame the debate as customers and consumers of cloud services in that fashion so that we ensure that we are meeting all of our goals from a compliance perspective. So this is the world today, right? If we were talking a year ago, this would be the emerging cloud services model. But this is the reality today. You have a lot of different choices out there from platform and software as a service vendors. You have a lot of emerging choices from the Verizon perspective around what we call everything as a service. And the reality is that you have opportunities to expand your business relationships, to expand your supplier relationships, and to start managing your global resources in a more aggressive fashion today. And at every opportunity that you have to expand your business and do something better and faster, there are going to be additional opportunities for attackers to come and look at you to see what they can actually pull from you. So it's just important to note that the world is bigger. The world is kind of that scary place, right? And I pulled some information from a security breach report that Verizon puts out every year just to start setting the stage a little bit for what's really going on in the world. In the first stat down there, 70% of breaches are a result of external agents. Not really a big surprise. You expect that number to be big. We're kind of programmed to understand that they want to get from the outside in and they want to get to our data. Interesting thing about that 70%, it's actually down from last year. But the other side of that coin is that 48% of breaches were caused by insiders, intentional and non-intentional. And that number is up drastically this year, up some 26% and counting. So the reality is that it's complex. And when we start talking about cloud security, it's not just your vendors and it's not just your application design. It's your people, it's your practices, it's the design for your cloud services providers. It's kind of the holistic view of what's going on in the space today. So it's just an interesting view on the world and what's happening. As you start looking to the cloud services vendors. There are a lot of different options out there, so I need to help kind of frame in what it is I'm going to try to speak to today. Minimally, there are two public cloud markets in the world today. And the first one is really what I would call the commodity services space. And in that particular space, price is king. So the goal is to race to the bottom to give you the least expensive compute platform that you can get. And there's value in that. The flip side to the commodity provider space is that their goal is price points and not necessarily providing you with the enterprise-grade security that you need for your applications and for your customer data. So for the remainder of the day, and when you come to visit the Verizon booths later today, we're going to be talking about the enterprise cloud experience and what that really means. And from an enterprise cloud perspective, it is exactly what it speaks to, right? It's designed for the enterprise. And what that means for you is it's designed with security and performance in mind. You heard a few minutes ago, if you attended the general session, that we have a great announcement that we're bringing a product to market with VMware around vCloud Data Center that is securely anchored in the enterprise cloud space. And then we can grow from the Verizon platform perspective our cloud services model for you from that fully virtualized, highly secure VMware-based vCloud Data Center experience into a fully managed business outcomes and business SLA-driven experience through our computing as a service platform. So when we start talking about security, again, it's everything from the dotted line to the right. It is focused exclusively on the enterprise cloud models and what we can do to help you deliver production-grade applications to the market as we go forward. All right, so why is security so important? Certainly from my perspective as a provider of services, security is important to me because it is the leading inhibitor to adoption for cloud services. So for me to be commercially successful, I have to acknowledge the fact that security is an issue out there. The remainder of the points on the slide are actually focused on both you and I, both as customers and as providers. And I say that because our goal in our business delivery models is to protect our brand. It's to protect our customers, our livelihood, to protect our shareholders, right? It's to enable ourselves to deliver services that we know are in compliance for our regulatory needs. And it's our ability to do that despite the fact that every month and every day of every month, the number of threats grows exponentially. If you look at the upper right-hand corner of this particular slide, you're going to see some actual data that Verizon has pulled from a proprietary security management engine we have that's called the State and Event Analysis Machine, or SEAM engine for short. More than 2 trillion events can be processed in any given month, and that number is over a year old. And what that means to you as the consumer or as the provider of internal IT services to your organization is that you are potentially having to coalesce and manage 2 trillion data points a month just to figure out if your application is being properly delivered and securely delivered to the internet. If you're analyzing your data, which is something we obviously do on a regular basis, you're going to start culling that information down into security events that you can identify and really down to the bottom of that cone, which is, okay, these are the harmful attacks that I really care about. So from some greater than 2 trillion events, we're down to 6,500 events that now you or someone like you is going to be managing or saying why you don't have to manage them on a daily basis. Bottom line, your vulnerabilities and your threats are growing on a regular basis. And so the first thing that we need to do when we start having our conversation with you as a provider and as a consumer of cloud services is I need to start helping you to frame the debate a little bit. And I say that because you have to be able to ask the right questions to get the right answers, right? This is just an example of some questions that were provided to us from some of our security experts, the types of questions that you should be asking every day. And they're really fundamental. Looking at your application, what type of data is in that application? Is it customer data? Where is that data going? Do I have control over it? Can I get to it when I need it? How is my actual application protected from the outside world? How is it protected from other customers on the inside of that world? Just fundamental questions that you have to start asking yourselves and asking your providers to shape the debate around security and around the platforms that are emerging in the place today. And obviously, standards and practices are always a good place for a provider to start. Talking about SAS 70, talking about any number of key certifications around PCI. Good places to start. If you know your platforms are there, then it gives us a good basis as a provider to talk to you as we go forward. So from those fundamental questions, we're going to start by helping you to build a checklist, right? The things that you need to know about and trying to really talk the talk in a way that people understand it, or at least security professionals understand it. And what that means to you is that you build your checklist based on a couple of key areas, looking at physical and logical protections. Some of these areas are exclusively going to be owned by the service provider that you're working with. Things like physical and logical isolation are key tenets of how we build and provide our services to you. But when you start looking at some of the other categories like authentication and encryption, that's kind of a shared responsibility, right? As the provider, I have a responsibility to you as the customer to provide you with secure authentication to and from our portals, to and from the underlying applications, and to and from those resources. But then that shared component of that responsibility is that as you deploy your applications into the space, you also have to keep thinking about these authentication and encryption methods so that you can securely deliver your user credentials, that you can securely deliver components of your data to your end customers. So it's not always going to be on the provider. It's a shared responsibility when we start having these conversations around how you build your checklist and what you do. From the point where you get into encryption and how we're going to securely transport data for you, it's important to note how your provider is doing inspection. And I say this because every customer needs network isolation. Every customer needs to know that their provider is actually looking at those packets that are coming across. As the provider, I'm looking at every packet that comes through, and that's my responsibility to you so that we know what's going on, so that we understand where these threats and vulnerabilities are coming from in the world. And that is our responsibility to you. It's also your responsibility to ask the right questions. It's your responsibility to know how to manage and deploy firewall services or to leverage the tools that the providers are giving to you. And there are really good tools out there, whether you're leveraging the computing as a service interface, whether you're leveraging the vCloud data center interface where you start talking about your vShield Edge firewalls. You have to know and understand these technologies, or you simply have to ask some more questions so that we as a provider can help you to get there. And then, of course, the governance components of all of these security components really override everything because you're only as good as what you're accountable to, right? And that's what you can report, it's how you can report it, and how you can state your compliance as you go forward. So what does this really mean, and how do you start digging into some of these layers? You know, probably the most unglamorous of all security discussions is at the facility level, right? It's the physical structure. Is it secure? Is it redundant to environmental impacts? Do they do basic things like employee background checks? What do we do when employees come? What do we do when they go? How do we ensure for you that the people that are touching the infrastructure and managing that infrastructure are the right people for the job? How do we isolate our facilities so that you only have access to what you need access to? So the guy that's fixing the AC doesn't have access to your network, and the guy that's working on the network doesn't touch the servers. Core functionality of a service provider, and these are the types of things that you just have to ask, you have to be able to state. Ultimately, as a provider, I do feel that we should take all of these things a little bit more seriously than what you do today. And I know that you have extremely high standards for yourselves. But because we're talking multi-tenancy, because we're talking about, just enormous volumes from a service-driven perspective, it's important that your service provider has the basics around physical security. It's just a baseline component for it. From there, it starts to get a little bit interesting. And this is where you start seeing a lot of differentiation in services and what's out there today. And generally speaking, when you start talking about logical segregation, network architecture, you assume it's from the outside in, and that's certainly true. So from the Verizon perspective, every node we deploy today, we do deploy with a level of network intrusion detection. As I noted before, we're inspecting those packets. We know what's coming in and out of the environment. We do have some automation in place to automatically black hole certain types of attacks today. And that's just something that we have to do to keep ourselves healthy and something we have to do to keep your environments healthy. But it isn't just about what's happening on the outside and what's coming in. It's also about ensuring that when you are a consumer of a cloud service, that in addition to that north-south traffic that everyone is very focused on, you understand how things work east-west. Because you need to be able to talk to your own servers inside of this infrastructure, but you also have to ensure that your provider is deploying a secure network container where you have your manageable IP space, your manageable tiers within the network that are securely isolated from every other customer in that environment. So it's very critical that we start talking about traffic both north-south, in and out of the environment, as well as east and west between the resources that you're deploying in the space. And fundamental to most of those elements are the basic tools of the trade, right? Firewalls, load balancers, methods for secure remote access, both to and from the portal, as well as to and from those resources. Are we using multi-factor authentication? Can we support our RSA fobs? Do we enable remote desktops, and how? What would we do? Part of these are things that you need to know just so that you understand your business better. And the other component of that is knowing that the provider is giving you access to something and only the right people can get to it, right? Core fundamentals around the network component. And this is a great stopping point to take a half a step back to what they were talking about at the general session today on vCloud Data Center. We, from the network perspective, preach network security on a daily basis. It's what we do and it's what we're known for. And VMware really stepped forward with their vCloud Data Center initiative, and they put forward a nice software-based virtualized network infrastructure that helps to ensure all of these things. It enables you to manage your traffic in and out of the infrastructure. It enables you to define and control what you're doing within your infrastructure. And this marries very well with the services we already have in the market today. And they are fundamental services in the enterprise cloud space. So you want to ask the questions around inspection, ask the questions around isolation, ensure that your provider can speak to how they isolate your compute resources from each other, and give you the tools of the trade to continue managing those resources going forward. Other basic components, again, back to kind of the authentication and access methodologies. It's assumed that in a cloud-based portal or cloud-based delivery model that we are able to provide you with a secure remote access portal. It's securely delivered over SSL or SSH encrypted sessions. It's not just about the portal, though. It's about how you get to those resources after the fact. And I talked about this a little bit earlier. It's very, very important that you understand how you get key components of your infrastructure delivered to you, looking at how you receive first-time use passwords, how your provider enables multi-factor authentication to deliver these passwords over SSL encrypted sessions so that you're not getting things via email, so that you're not out there, exposed to the wild, if you will, as soon as you provision that server. And it's not just about the things that you touch, it's about the things that your providers touch as well, such that when you make requests of us, those requests are tracked, that we can be accountable for the actions that we take as we go forward into the space together. And this is where you start to see the shift from the things that you are enabled to do in a cloud platform, basic things around change management in the portal. These are fundamental in the cloud. You have portal access. You can go in and make any change you want. How does the service provider help you to do that? The key is you do it yourself, right? That's the great thing about the cloud. The other side of that equation is you have to control your people and you have to control your resources, and we as a provider have to provide back to you fundamentals around change management that is affected through the portal. So basic logs, activity logs that are exposed to you, that are reportable to you, that you can actually expose to your management and say, look, this is where we are. This is the list of every action that was taken on my cloud-based resources in the last 30, 60, or 90 days. We're accountable to give you that information, and you're accountable to use it from an audit perspective, just from a general compliance perspective. But beyond the changes that you make, I have to be accountable for the changes that I make. So back to that being, the accountability of the employees that we have. When you log in and you make a request of me via ticket, all of the activities that I make also have to be tracked. Many of those will be tracked through the same tools that you're using to track your own activities today. However, from a service provider perspective, I am accountable for having detailed logs for all activities that are affected across this infrastructure. Not all of these will be customer-facing. Many of them are available upon request. But we're talking about logging key activities, whether they're done through automation, through people, through remote logins to your servers. It's a good value add for me as a service provider to help you with change management, to help you with patch management, and to have a strategy for patch management, both across the customer platform as well as across what you need from a patch management perspective. But I can only do it if I can do it in a way that's accountable to you. So you have to ensure when you talk to your providers that you ask how we're providing those logs, how we show who actually is making these changes is the right person, that they did it in the time frame that they requested, and that it was actually a required change. Basic things. And this kind of falls into the layered services approach in the managed cloud space, where you pay for what you want. And in many scenarios, it's an unmanaged cloud experience where you own all of the changes and you own all of the patching. And that's a really good model for customers that are looking for lower cost cloud services. But as you graduate into production grade services, there are scenarios where you're going to want your service provider to put forward a patch strategy to manage the patching and the changes for you. And most providers are happy to do that if they actually play in the enterprise space, as long as you're aware of what you're buying, that you're aware of the strategy that's being put forward, and that it can be accountable to you, to your auditors, to your requirements as you go forward. So the all-important question, data. It's your data, but it's not in your facility. What does that mean to you? It can mean a lot of different things to you, to be frank, depending on what you're trying to do. Do you need backups? Yes or no? It's a different world today. Not everything has to go to tape. Not everything goes to Iron Mountain. Are you using multiple copies of that data? Are you replicating it around the world or within a facility? These are all choices that are up to you. But to the extent that you are going to contract for backup services, you have to understand how that data is being managed, because now your data is being put on a tape and it's being put on a truck and it's going somewhere. So how do you ensure that what you need to get backed up gets backed up? ask the questions, understand the backup policies, know how that data is actually managed as you go forward. From a discovery perspective, how do I get to that data? How do I fulfill compliance or subpoena requests? How do we do e-discovery? It's a we in that scenario. Am I doing that for you? Are you doing that for yourselves? It does come down to accountability and ownership of your data because it is yours. And the fact that it's in the cloud, quote unquote, doesn't mean that you shouldn't know where it is and that you shouldn't have control over where it goes. So owning your data, owning who has access to it, and knowing what happens when you leave are critical components of any hosted service, and specifically when it comes to cloud-based services. When you hit, delete server, turn down server, remove server, what happens to those bits? Do they get reset? Are they sitting out there on some SAN? What about the replicated copies? What about the backup copies of that data? You spun it up, you said you wanted backups, you said you want it replicated. Boom, 10 copies of your data all around the world. You just need to know where it is. Managing data on a day-to-day basis is a fairly important component. Managing access to the data from a provider perspective is a key component for me, but you have to know where it is. And you shouldn't ever take the answer of it's in this general area or this person may have had access to it, right? It's about ownership over that data. It's about knowing where it is, and it's about knowing who can touch it at any given time. And beyond all of this framework that is, kind of the core design components for what a cloud service actually is, you have to be able to look for other value-added services depending on what your compliance needs may be. Whether it's log management, basic things like antivirus. Can you click to provision antivirus? Can you click and provision host-based intrusion detection? Do you have network intrusion detection? There are a lot of good questions, but there are a lot of additional things that you need to do in many circumstances to obtain your PCI compliance, to obtain other regulatory requirements, whether they're internal or external. And looking for those services so that you can understand how they're deployed and how they can actually be brought to bear to help you with your business needs is a key component of what we as a security services provider do on a daily basis. This isn't the click to provision, hey, I just got all this great stuff. This is the, hey, it's in the cloud, and hey, this is my business and my livelihood. How do I ensure that this stuff all works? How do I ensure that I can get to it? And how do we bring extra value to it? I'm not going to go into any great detail on any one of our value-added security services today because we have a really good team that's working the Verizon booth right now. But I got a couple general questions, so we tried to put forward a couple basic examples, or at least one basic example of a standard value-added service that Verizon provides around application vulnerability scanning and how that service looks to you as the end customer. So in a standard model where you have web-based applications and you have to be accountable for the vulnerability of those applications, in other words, ensuring that that data is secure, that your access methods are actually working, we Verizon can certainly help you with that type of a use case. And in this scenario, for application scanning, it's a pretty consumable and understandable model, right? You have your public-facing URLs, you put forward basic credentials, and you come to us and you say, hey, Tell me what's going on. Am I secure? We can register those URLs and we can start a scanning process. Initial scanning on this environment is going to take 2 to 3 weeks because it's a very low impact scan to you as the end customer, right? We're going to check those URLs, we're going to log those credentials, and we're going to start sending out requests. We're going to start feeling through that infrastructure, and we're going to see where your potential vulnerabilities are. Web applications are the largest area of vulnerability in the world today. And it's one of our jobs, obviously, to do that. And it's not just public-facing applications that are the problem, right? It's also your internal applications. We all use SharePoint. We all use all these great websites within our company, and we all leverage single sign-on for most of those applications. So we can also levy the same type of intelligence across your internal and your external applications to see where you land and then report that information back to you. It's about good data. It's about being accountable for it and how you can get through that process effectively. The goal was to provide you with a demonstration on a few of the new emerging features around vCloud Data Center and things of that nature. However, the internal network within the building isn't actually cooperating with us, so I'm going to proceed through the presentation and do some Q&A, and then I'll try to pull it up so you can see a little bit more about vCloud Data Center and what we've been doing with computing as a service as we go forward. But before we close out today, I just want to kind of give you some good high-level information that is actually available to you at our booth today around what security in the world looks like today, right? No great shock to you that 98% of all data in the world is breached off servers, right? The consumer, market, not really where the criminals of the world are going to get their data. A couple interesting components of that information are that, obviously 96% of that was intentional hacking. People are out there, they're looking at your web applications, and they're trying to get to your data. No real surprise there. But where it gets interesting is when you start looking at the people that are telling you that your data is secure with them, right? Almost 80% of all victims from hacking attacks are by entities or corporations that are actually supposed to be held to PCI levels of compliance and are not compliant. What that means to you and I is that there's a lot of stuff going on in the world today. There are a lot of regulations that people are, very diligently laying down and that they're following. And at the end of the day, the individual organizations aren't holding themselves to the right standards. It's a very verbose and large statement to make, and I don't like making these large and finite statements, but the reality is that it's just there. The data speaks for itself, and if you skim through the data breach report, or if you take it with you and look at it on the flight home, look at some of the statistics. Understand that because somebody is supposed to be PCI compliant, ask and see if they are. Ask how PCI compliance works for their applications and their infrastructure today. Because the shocking statistics are that the majority of those breaches, they're not compliant with the standards that you would expect them to be as you go forward through the world today. So some really good information available to you from the Verizon perspective. With that, I want to open it up for some questions. This was really the 10,000-foot view of security, and we're looking for some good dialogue as we start down the path of compliance in the cloud today from you, the end users, and how you're using this infrastructure. So to that, I'd like to open it up. If you could raise your hand. I guess we have a mic over here. I don't know that we need the mic or not. If you don't mind talking loudly, stay in your seats. I'll start right here in the middle.
Do you provide fiber connectivity to a customer's internal LAN where the data center provider yet
Sure.
they're using their own internet access?
We do a couple different things, and I'll see if I can pull up the demo while I'm talking to you. From a computing as a service perspective, at launch, we supported what we call private networking. So you always have options for public internet to and from our platforms, but we also do backhaul connectivity, which is private networking to your facility. So you can have exclusive connectivity over the backhaul, really using it as a data center expansion of your own facility. You can do a little bit of both. You have really the discretion in our world of leveraging your private networks, our public networks, or a combination of both. And we have a number of customers that in reality are very happy using only their private network connectivity because they want to send it through their gateways at the end of the day. Great question, though. There's another question over in the back. Yes? We do. And admittedly, our initial launch into computing as a service was the assumption that you had a friendly admin at all times, right? And so what we've understood from kind of going down the path is that we want granular role-based access down to every resource in the infrastructure. So we're aggressively adding role-based access at every layer within computing as a service now so that you can ensure that public IPs, that network resources, physical and virtual servers, that all the components that you can provision, you can actually attach role-based access to. And that aligns very well with what we're also going to be launching in conjunction with VMware because they are very obviously invested in role-based access to that infrastructure. I'm going to see if I can log into this while I'm talking to you, and I'll show you a little bit about some of the backhaul connectivity components that we were just talking about. Another question in the middle.
What are you using to orchestrate the creation of virtual firewall load balancer instances? And additionally, what product are you using for the patching, auditing, all that stuff?
Most of our automation throughout the infrastructure, we're leveraging what used to be known as Opsware. It's now part of the HP automation suite. So we're leveraging NA, SA, OO, and a number of the other HP tools to automate provisioning of virtual and physical devices. On the network components, it's going to be the Cisco ACEs and FWSMs. We're using virtual context on those devices within CaaS. In the context of the vCloud infrastructure, it's a fully virtualized network infrastructure. So everything, the vShield Edge in, is all going to be fully virtualized. So you have some choices around performance, fully virtualized, partially virtualized, and things like that as you go forward. Patch management. I don't actually have the answer for you there. We use a lot of the HP tools for a lot of our patch management, but we also have some homegrown Verizon tools that we've been using for the last 10 plus years that we use for patch management. So we use a combination of homegrown tools and some of the industry tools from HP so that we have good auditing and reportability because it is very strong across that infrastructure. Our network is not going to get us too far, so I won't be able to go too far down the path of giving you a good insight into network administration right now. I think that the key takeaways from our... there's another in the back. Sure. It's a great question. So I'm going to kind of slide back in my deck to the Continuum just so that you can understand a little bit about how we're actually approaching this. What we did when we launched Computing as a Service last year is we came into the cloud in kind of the managed services cloud space. And what that means is that Verizon is providing the OSs and the applications, and then we can very easily do patching in that model. It's a good business model, but it only addresses a certain percentage of the cloud market. One of the goals behind going forward with a product like vCloud for us is that we can also expand our portfolio to the unmanaged cloud. So you can send what you want. You can literally export your OVF out of your infrastructure and bring it into the Verizon infrastructure, and I don't have to do patch management for you. It is going to be an option if you want us to provide value-added management. But day one, the goal is unmanaged cloud, giving you a more competitive price point within the scope of the enterprise cloud, so you still have the security benefits and things like that. Follow up? I mean, admittedly, when we start digging into the actual layers for how vCloud works, the teardown and the removal process are there. We start talking about the virtual data center. I'm going to keep going back because I'm making slow progress as we go forward. So part of it is going to be me explaining to you best practices around teardown. In the computing as a service world today, when you hit turn down a physical server, I can talk to you about how the bits on the array get reset, right? And it's this great story. It's a little bit of a different story in the virtualized space, right? Because when you turn down a VM on a cluster, you don't necessarily automatically proactively start resetting those bits. So you have to know that when you hit delete, that you actually have a couple steps for delete in vCloud. One is it expires it, and then two is you have to hard delete it out of your system. So I think it's me owning the fact that I have to explain that to you, and in conjunction with VMware, because they're providing a lot of native security in that scenario. I think that there's always a level of trust that's required, which is why when we deploy vCloud, we deployed it into our existing SAS 70 and PCI, level 1 accredited infrastructure. We can be accountable for our practices and how we do things. We do these things so that we can show you some level of trust, minimally through audits, and then through, just continuing to build the relationship. I think that anything you do, internal or external, where you're leveraging something like virtualization, there's a certain trust factor that it works. And it's taken years for VMware to successfully establish that, and I certainly embrace and appreciate what they've done. Other components or other questions? All right, well, I was hoping to give you a little bit more insight into it, but I'm going to have to recommend that you stop by our booth. We have a lot of really great security experts there. Some of them are in the room with us today. We also have a few engineers on site, so thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.